What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Godly Engineer podcast. If you're new here, I'm your host, Dave Johnson, and I'm a cybersecurity engineer at Amazon, a builder, and a believer in Christ. This podcast is all about the intersection of our faith in Christ and our engineering careers. As engineers, builders, problem solvers, innovators, and technologists, we impact billions of lives through our work. But as Christians, we're called to something deeper, to work and live in alignment with God's word for his plans and purposes for us. This season we'll be exploring the concept of wisdom, the godly wisdom that's outlined in the amazing book of Proverbs. In today's episode, for a two-part series to end this season, we're going to go over 7 characteristics of a wise engineer. These were all extracted from the book of Proverbs from chapters 10 through 15. I'll go over a couple of those characteristics as they're outlined here in the book of Proverbs, and then I'll finish up the rest in the next and final episode for this season. I know this particular episode is a little later than usual. My apologies for that. There's just been so much going on just with life and work, and it definitely delayed this episode, but I will try to get this out as soon as possible and also get the final episode before the end of the year. So bear with me there. All right, let's get to the first characteristic of a wise engineer. The first characteristic of a wise engineer is hard work. This is something I've talked about over the course of multiple episodes in this podcast so far. I talk about laziness a lot because the Bible has a lot to say about laziness. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 4 says, "A slack hand produces nothing but poverty, but an industrious hand soon takes hold of riches." So simple, yet so profound. Verse 26 says, "As vinegar vexes the teeth, and as smoke irritates the eye, so a slacker annoys his boss." Now, that's a bit of a funny one, but I don't know about y'all listening or watching this episode, but I particularly just don't like laziness or lazy people because there's just something inherently entitled about it. There's so many reasons why you can look at someone who's lazy and just like feel some sort of negative feelings towards them, because no one likes people who are lazy. No one likes laziness. And sometimes like laziness could be found in us, right? We could really truly be lazy no matter how sometimes you have your days, but Proverbs tells us in so many ways like laziness should not be found with a godly engineer, with a wise engineer. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 11 says, "Whoever works the land will have more than enough food, but whoever follows empty pursuits lacks sense." Again, this is pointing to actually putting in the work. I know a lot of people, especially just being a content creator, several people reach out to me. I have several conversations, and a lot of people are not really willing to put in the work. That's not wise. That's really not going to get you anywhere. But what Proverbs is saying here is if you actually put in the work, you will have results for it. But if you are going after empty pursuits, really like putting your efforts into meaningless things, I don't know, maybe like things that are not actually beneficial to your career or to what God's called you to do, then it's essentially saying that whoever does that lacks sense. I'm not the one who says that. That's what Proverbs is saying here in chapter 12, verse 11. So again, this is another admonishment to actually put in the work for what you want to get out of it. This person is working to have food. Some of us are working to build our skills, are working to get better at what we do, are working to grow and get promoted. A wise engineer is one that truly has hard work embedded in them. The same chapter 12 verse 14 says, "Words spoken wisely result in much good, and working with your hands pays a large reward." Verse 24 says, "The hand of the hard worker will one day rule, and slackers will be forced to labor." Verse 27 of chapter 12 says, "Slackers don't take time to cook their food, but hard workers prize everything they have." Another thing that comes out of being hardworking is you really start to realize the cost of everything. You realize that everything that you want, that you desire, has a cost to it. And a lot of times, the largest cost to that is hard work. So as a wise engineer, you should really be trying to cultivate the skill of actually being hardworking. Sometimes being hardworking doesn't come inherently. You have to really get to a point where you're trusting God to give you strength to put in the hard work, and you're also just putting in the effort to actually do hard things. And this is really spoken of well in chapter 13, verse 4, where it says, "Slackers crave but have their fill of nothing, but the hardworking desire and are completely satisfied." This makes me think of people who just like, when you crave, right, it's like it's a feeling of something. You're not doing anything about your craving. But when you actually do something about it, right, if you're craving something and you actually go get it, right, you've put in the work to actually satisfy that craving. And that's kind of like the dissonance between hard work and laziness. Lazy people usually are just generally like, man, I wish I could do this. I wish I could own this. I wish I could be at this level. I wish I could have this job. But it's like, okay, you're not really doing anything to get closer to that. The hardworking person is like, okay, I desire to have this. I'm going to trust God to help me, and I'm going to actually take the steps and put in the effort to actually go after these things that I desire, these things that I want, and these things that God has called me to do. So hard work is one of the fundamental characteristics of a wise and godly engineer. And I really encourage you all out there to cultivate this. This is something that should be a part of all the different things that we do as engineers, right? Like we should not embody, godly engineers should not embody laziness. Laziness should not be found around us. Like several people in the Bible that we look up to, and in several instances, we see that the Lord is not lazy. He works hard. He created, the entirety of the universe and the heavens and the earth and all these magnificent things in 6 days. And then he rested on the seventh day. God coming to earth as man literally also had a job. He was a carpenter. And so if the most powerful, greatest, the one that we look up to every day, that we put our faith in, could come there and work and do all these things and just deliver so much in the short time that he had, how much more us as godly engineers, we're called to be hardworking. And a quick word of caution, this is not a hard work that is pushing for hustle culture. I think hustle culture is worldly culture. Hustle culture tells you you're working 24/7. However, I think we should embody the kind of work that God did and what he embodied, what he personified, and also really what he encouraged the Israelites to do. I think it's a really beautiful model of work where you work 6 days and you rest on the seventh. I personally do that. Like I work for 6 days and I do my very best to rest on the seventh. This is not calling you to essentially work all day, every day. That's not what hard work is. That's hustle culture. This admonishment, you will see it in several parts of the Bible. There is always some rest because your body needs it and you need that time to take a step back from work so it doesn't become your God. So that's a word of caution for hard work. The next characteristic of a wise engineer is knowledge acquisition. And this was one that I really found interesting, the way Proverbs laid it out. If we look at Proverbs chapter 10, verse 5, it says, "A wise son stores up for the winter months while it is still summer, but a shameful son lies around even during the harvest." And then verse 14 says, "The wise store up knowledge as a safeguard, but the meaningless chatter of fools means that chaos is near." This was very interesting. I was like, wow, so the wise people store up knowledge as a safeguard. The wise son stores up for the winter months. And what this meant to me was knowledge acquisition. I believe this is referencing learning. Like just learning new things, because you never really know when you're going to be applying them, right? It says the wise store up knowledge as a safeguard, but the meaningless chatter of fools means that chaos. So this is learning. This is knowledge acquisition, because when you store up knowledge as a safeguard, it's because you want to use it later on. So this admonishment here is to value knowledge acquisition. It actually even says it like more clearly in chapter 13, verse 16. It says, "A clever person acquires knowledge and then acts on it, but a fool advertises his folly for all to see." So it's like the characteristic of knowledge acquisition is something that wise people do. It's like you acquire knowledge, you learn something, right, as we've seen in the previous ones. But this verse is saying you learn it and then you act on it. I think this is one thing that I struggle with personally, where I could, just go after just learning things, but never really applying it. And I think it's something that the Lord has been working on in me, and a lot of things have been kind of stripped out for me as to where I take my learning in a way where I learn something and apply it immediately. I mean, really, even the science says about it. The sooner you're able to apply something you're learning, the better it sticks. So this is also a very, very clear characteristic of a wise engineer. You acquire knowledge and you also act on that knowledge. Chapter 15, verse 14 says, "Those who have understanding hearts hunger after knowledge, but those with no understanding feast on foolishness." Again, here we're seeing this thirst for knowledge, this desire for learning. As a wise engineer, you always want a desire to learn and to build new skills, to gather knowledge and to act on that knowledge. And in verse 31 of chapter 15, it says, "Those who learn from the lessons of life will join the others who are wise." I think this is also a very practical one, as to where it's one of the best things you can really do, like just as a person in general, whether an engineer, is really learn from the lessons of life. There's just so many things I've learned from life that if I never learned those lessons, I wouldn't know. And if I never took those lessons and applied them and made sure to not make certain mistakes again or approach situations differently, that would be foolish of me. So in the same breath, a wise engineer is someone who desires to acquire knowledge, who desires to learn, who hungers for learning, whether it's necessary or not, and also takes the step of applying what they're learning and acting on it. Now, the third characteristic of a wise engineer is humility. In the last episode, we talked about pride, and I encourage y'all to go watch or listen to that episode. I will leave it in the description or in the show notes. But that episode was one that's very personal to me because it's something I struggle with. I struggle with pride. I struggle with arrogance. Honestly, it's one of the things that everybody struggles with, just being honest. I'm currently reading a book, Mere Christianity, which is a book I said I was going to start reading in the last episode. I'm like halfway through the book, and goodness, it is so good. It's called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And right now I'm on the chapter that talks about pride, that talks about self-conceit. And man, it's so eye-opening. I highly recommend reading it. I'll probably leave a link to it in the description of the show notes. But I talked about pride in the last episode, so go check it out. But Proverbs chapter 10 verse 8 says, "The wise at heart will gladly obey direction, but one who fills the air with meaningful talk will fall into ruin." We can see here that there's like a postulation, right? The wise person is like, okay, yeah, I'll follow instructions. I will obey instructions. But the other person is like just filling the air with meaningless talk, right? Maybe just brushing themselves as an expert when they really don't know anything. It's pride that's going to make you feel that way, right? And I covered a lot of that in the last episode. So definitely check it out. Humility is like what it says in verse 17 of chapter 10. It says, "Those who accept instruction are travelers on the road to a meaningful life, but those who refuse correction wander off and pave a path to ruin." I think this is what arrogance and pride will make you do, right? It will make you go in the wrong way. We've seen this, like we saw this with Adam and Eve. The Lord gave them instructions, but they decided to go in the wrong direction, and that led to the fall of humanity. That led to sin. Humility is we accept instructions and we take these instructions and we follow them, right? Humility is when you fail at something at work or when you do something the wrong way, being open to criticism and correction, right? That points you in the right direction. I see several people who kind of get a little bit offended when they're given criticism or given advice, especially when they've missed the mark on something. A wise engineer is not someone who does that. The wise engineer listens to instructions. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2, it says, "When pride comes, shame is not far behind, but wisdom accompanies those who are humble." Humility here again. In chapter 12, verse 9, it says, "It is better to be overlooked and have a servant than to be pretentious and have nothing to eat." I think what this is saying is sometimes you want to be noticed. You want to be at the forefront. And honestly, I do struggle with this. But this is saying it's better to have enough, have what you need, and no one really, knows about you, than to be pretentious and act like you're everything, but really have nothing, right? That's what is going to eventually lead to shame. Like what it says in chapter 11, verse 2, it says, "When pride comes, shame is not far behind, but wisdom accompanies those who are humble." Humility is a skill that you want to have as a wise engineer. In verse 15 of chapter 12, it says, "Fools follow their own directions and think they're right, but wise people listen intently to advice." I think this is something that it's easy to feel like you're right when you have all these things or accolades or successes behind you or whatever the case is, right? It's good to have some confidence in your abilities. But I've come to learn that if you fall into the trap of thinking that you're always right, that thoughts, your opinions, and whatever it is that you say is what matters and what is always correct, you're going to fall into arrogance really quickly. I've seen this for myself, and I've seen this with people around me as well. A wise engineer has to learn how to listen intently to advice. And sometimes listening to advice is hard, especially if you have a inflated sense of self because you're like, I don't need this advice, right? I don't like, what are you telling me this for? But I encourage you that it's rather you're better listening to advice, taking it, doing with it what you will, than not listening at all and feeling like you already know it. Humility is what is going to allow you to do that. And that's one of the virtues of a wise and godly engineer. One last verse for you on this. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 1 says, "A wise child is attentive to his parents' instruction, but the mocker is deaf to correction." Verse 7 says, "One pretends he's wealthy, but he's nothing, while another seems to be poor, but has great wealth." Verse 10, "Arrogance only produces arguments, but wisdom accompanies those well advised. Verse 13, the one who hates good counsel will reap failure and ruin, but the one who reverses God's instruction will be rewarded. Verse 18 says, a person who turns from correction faces poverty and shame, but one who regards constructive criticism is well respected. Always take and listen to constructive criticism. It's a sign of humility, and it helps you practice humility if you don't have it yet. In chapter 15, verse 33 says, reverence for the eternal is the first lesson of wisdom, and humility always precedes honor. All right, let's go to the next characteristic of a wise engineer. The next characteristic is integrity. The word integrity comes from the word integer, or is related to integer. The word integer is a whole. It's untruncated, right? It's not like a float, which is, decimal. It's a whole number. Integrity is one of the most important virtues. Your word is your word. You stand by your word. That's actually one of the characteristics of God. God is the most integrous being ever, because his word is always true. It has always been true. It is still true today and will forever be true. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 9 says, the path of integrity is always safe, but a person who follows a crooked way will be exposed. Chapter 11 verse 3 says, the right living are guided by integrity, but the crooked ways of the faithless will lead to ruin. Chapter 12 verse 28 says, life springs up along the path of integrity, and death has no place along its course. Integrity is one of the strongest and best skills and characteristics you can ever have as a godly engineer. You will have situations or face situations where it seems better to cut corners, where it seems better to do the wrong thing, where it feels better to take the wrong actions, where it feels easier to take credit for someone else's work, where it feels easier to slightly manipulate something as to where it's not what it should be. But integrity is what keeps you grounded and keeps you focused on going on the straight and narrow, on the right path. It's not always easy, because you will face situations where it's easier to cut corners. It's easier to lie. It's easier to make the wrong decision. But integrity is what's going to say, hey, I'm going to have to make this decision, or I'm going to have to do this thing that might not necessarily bode well for me, but because my integrity matters, because my integrity matters to me and God sees, right? The moment you realize that even if no one else sees, God knows, that instinct of being integrous should kick in. And God honors, God rewards that. God is the reward. The Bible says the Lord is the rewarder of them that do good. And God honors and rewards that. So I encourage you, the best time to practice integrity is when it's the hardest. Ask God to help you through that. All right, that's 4 characteristics of a wise engineer. Still got 3 more here, but I'll save that for the next episode. I really encourage y'all as wise engineers to just spend time reading the word. It's so packed with lots of wisdom. Man, Proverbs has just been so profound for me. It's just been really great. The Lord has really just opened up so much in here. Just reading the word every single day, pondering over it, thinking about it, trying to even live it. It's not easy. It's not the easiest thing. Like, I'm not perfect in any way. I'm not always able to apply these things, but the Lord's been faithful, helping me even when I stumble, and I'm working towards just being better across all these different things as he's showing me. And I'm glad I get to share this with all of y'all who listen and watch. So this is a quick reflection portion. Which one of these particular characteristics, hard work, integrity, humility, and knowledge acquisition, do you struggle most with? And what step can you take this week to become better in any of those things? If it's hard work, what is that one thing you can do this week that will stretch you out of your comfort zone? If it's humility, what is one way that you can practice humility? What is one way that you can deliberately humble yourself, whether in a conversation or in a meeting or in a design, architecture, sync, whatever it is? If it's integrity, what is something you've been cutting corners in? Or what is an opportunity for you to, even though people are not watching, to actually be integrous? Think about that and try to apply that this week. That's what I encourage you to do. And let me know what happens in the comments below. I'm really curious to know. Well, that's it for this episode. If you like this episode, be sure to like, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to give us a 5-star on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Let us know if you found this valuable and share this with someone, some other engineer or engineering student who might find this valuable. The Christian faith is a go and tell faith. It's a word of mouth faith. And I encourage y'all to share this. All right, that's it for this episode. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.